China intends to create a national technology safety management mechanism, a move aimed at protecting the advance of vital technology from national security risks. This message comes as China enters the 5G era. What legal framework will prevail in the pursuit of advanced technology? How is the global race to 5G shaping up? And what long-term consequences will arise from the China-U.S. trade dispute? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by He Jing, attorney at Anjie Law Firm, and Rick Dunham, visiting scholar with Tsinghua University. We shall also speak via satellite to Ernest McDuffie, founder of the Global McDuffie Group, a cybersecurity consultancy in Washington, D.C. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to our discussion here, gentlemen. First question, He Jing, China will create a national technology firewall. This move is being taken in line with the national security law, aiming to more effectively forestall and diffuse national security risks. What does this firewall actually mean for the future of, for example, digital cooperation between China and the rest of the world?
Well, right now the details are not available, but what it looks like, this is a mechanism really centered on this list. Okay, this looks like the NDRC, one of our most powerful ministries in China, are going to publish a list of sensitive technologies that's really the government want to put more focus from the security perspectives. This is new and also not entirely new. You know, China has been having this the technology regulation mechanism for years to deal with the export of the technologies. They divided up the technology into different the categories. But this time it looks like the NDRC is actually stepping into the regulatory game to really put this security as a key criteria to control what kind of technologies can be licensed out or exported.
Well, in the observation of overseas policymakers, Rick, this announcement may have delivered an alleged conflicting message. On the one hand, Chinese leadership makes it very clear we are ready to further open up the Chinese market as part of the campaign to ease the tensions mounting between the United States and China. On the other hand, we cite the excuse of national security to restrict access of overseas companies to segments that are related to our national security. It seems we are following President Trump's suit. I mean, in terms of national security, do you think this is a matter of retaliations, or do you think it's high time for major economies, particularly those who adopt high technology, digital one in particular, to be careful with the national security?
I think it goes beyond retaliation. In this case, I think that the new law presents a legal framework by which China can blacklist foreign companies at will. So it sets up a national security basis, which is what Donald Trump has cited in his attempt to blacklist Huawei. Basically, this gives the legal flexibility for China to do the same thing. Donald Trump is basically doing it by executive order. This is incorporating it into law.
Thank you very much. Let me cross over to Mr. Ernest McDuffie. Hello, Mr. McDuffie. What do you think of the immediate impact created by the Chinese announcement of setting up this firewall to blacklist the unreliable overseas enterprises?
So I'm not sure, just as your other guest said, what the details are of that agreement. But immediate impact, I think, is going to be minimal. This is a global technology, and the marketplace globally is going to have a much greater effect, I think, on the spread of the technology than either policies in China or the United States.
Question number 2, Ernest. How do you view this as a step to improve the protection of China's key technologies?
So, yeah, I mean, it's important, certainly from a national security standpoint, to protect advanced technologies as they apply to national security. But the threats are much greater than just the framework of 5G technology going in. All the applications that are going to ride on top of that framework are where most of your threats and vulnerabilities are going to exist. And those applications are going to be developed by a global supply chain that is going to be of concern to all parties to make sure that there aren't any malware or hidden backdoor traps in that software. So it's a multifaceted problem that goes beyond just the 5G technology itself. It goes beyond Huawei, it goes beyond the competitors to Huawei. So there's a lot more complexity involved here than just the simple layout of the platform for 5G to operate on.
Needless to say, this is a part of a broad security dilemma for the United States and China in the age of digital technology. What do you think of the timing when FedEx was accused of undermining the business or corporate security of Huawei by rerouting its packages from Japan to the United States? Now, do you think this is the most likely something that has triggered the current retaliations?
Actually, I do think that the kind of a scenario right now, the kind of environmental circumstances all the companies are facing highlight the potential, the risk, or extra attention from the governments. Okay, if we are not in this U.S.-China trade dispute, this kind of error or problem may be simply dismissed as a normal kind of a business problem. But right now, the attention like FedEx was receiving really highlights the kind of the dilemma the global companies is facing. They have to really comply with the laws in the U.S. or executive order, or to comply with the laws in in China. I think the technology, the security management, the mechanism, the unreliability, the entity list are actually the new steps like imposed by China to implement the national security law. This is all the steps to implement the law. The law is already there, but it requires a lot of implementation. So especially the unreliability entity list, if you're looking at it, usually more of announcement by the governments. It's not really, strictly speaking, not a regulation yet, issued by the governments. But I personally view is that I think China really at least wants to send a very strong message to the global companies who maybe have to do something that have a big impact on Chinese companies. I think the message from the Chinese government is that hey, if you have to cut off something to the Chinese companies, you better think twice, or you maybe come forward to talk to us, communicate to us. Maybe we'll tell you maybe what are the consequences, or what you should do to mitigate what you are planning to do.
Let me go back to Mr. Ernest McDuffie for this concern about whether American multinationals are ready to conspire with the FBI or Homeland Security Department, for example, to provide the necessary private data so that impact of extremism and terrorism would be mitigated and minimized. What do you think of the immediate reactions from heavyweight players such as Google, Facebook, and Twitter in this extreme case?
Yes, so there's always pressure on the tech companies' sectors because of the vast amount of data that they're able to collect. To cooperate with law enforcement and intelligence agencies under certain circumstances. Typically, those companies kind of fight against that because it affects their customer base. And they usually only apply when the courts get involved and really put pressure on them to comply with orders and instructions from FBI or any other law enforcement agency. And I really think that the governments on both sides are kind of operating in a vacuum to the extent that they really don't have a good understanding of how complex and how pervasive these systems are today, and certainly how more so they're going to be in the future. So I think we're seeing a little bit of overreaction on both sides of trying to get a handle on what's happening there. But it's really going to be up to the marketplace to determine, what happens globally with this technology.
Rick, what do you think of the latest announcement by Huawei to push back, to fight a legal battle against the Canadian government and the U.S. government by the end of the day? Of course, it's what we call offshore balancing through Canada, which unfortunately falls victim to something that is getting nasty between these two biggest economies, Washington and Beijing. So what do you think of the statement by the legal department of Huawei?
Well, it was lengthy, and I think it was clear. I think there are two major sets of issues that Huawei faces. One that we were talking about, the global market, and the attempts by the Trump administration to blacklist or limit Huawei's global reach. The second one is the case in Canada and the American government's attempts to extradite Huawei's CFO. And that Huawei was very clear. They were saying she didn't break Canadian law, so she should not be held, that there is no underlying crime according to Huawei, and that her rights are violated under American and Canadian constitutions because she is not being given due process to see the evidence against her. Basically, they're told that she is a national security threat, that Huawei has done things without providing evidence. So I think if Huawei wins any one of these arguments in Canadian court, she goes free. We don't know what the Canadian courts will do. Huawei is accusing them of being a political tool of the Trump administration. So we will see. The Canadian courts, will they rule for her? And really it's important on which one of these grounds if she is freed. It may not be for her freedom, but it is legally as we go forward for what the Trump administration may try to do as the trade war continues to unfold.
Mr. He Jing, it comes as no major surprise that measures and countermeasures are, in most cases, politically motivated in this current round of trade disputes between the United States and China. However, with the upcoming summit meeting in Japan, the G20 summit, and President Trump is likely to meet with the Chinese counterpart, hopefully to find a solution to the current dilemma. Now, what do you think of the chance from your legal perspective as an attorney with the Angie law firm, what's the chance for Huawei to win the case?
Right now, from what the spokesperson of Huawei said, looks like Huawei raised some very strong and legitimate defense. It will be very interesting to see how the Canadian government and fundamentally, eventually, the U.S. district attorney, right, the federal district attorney, going to present the case. For example, right now, I think the Huawei raised a very strong defense that whatever the CFO said to the bank wasn't really relied upon by the bank in any case, and the bank should be fully realized that Huawei has not done any business with that Skycom. So this is very fact-sensitive. And if the Canada, the governments, or especially eventually the U.S., the DOJ wants to really push this case, they have to present very, very strong facts that are really clear and convincing, so that the Canada government in the court will make the decision. But right now, look from what the spokesperson said, it looks like Huawei has a very good case to fight on.
Let me go back to Ernest McDuffie. What do you think of the prospects for Huawei to win the case, or you would rather be pessimistic? Let me know your sentiments.
Yeah, I would agree. I think Huawei's got a strong case. I have faith in the independence of the Canadian judicial system, and I think they will look for, they will be, fact-based. They will look for actual evidence of a crime before they make any kind of a commitment. I don't think that the Trump administration has any real power over affecting the judicial system in Canada, and I just don't have much confidence in the ability of this current administration to bully the rest of the international community into things without basis in fact. And so the facts seem to be well on Huawei's side.
Ernest, let me know more about some of the basics concerning the legal battles well underway. For example, we'd like to know more about the so-called long-arm jurisdiction. What's the legitimacy of this legal measure? For most of the Chinese, they have been left puzzled as to whether this amounts to legal interference with the internal affairs of another country, particularly a competitor.
Yeah, so I'm not really familiar with that. You know, the legal machinations, my area of expertise are really more the technical side of cybersecurity activities. You know, the international laws and things seem to be pretty fluid, and you know, we're really moving into a new area. This technology, as it advances, forces the laws and the policies to try to keep up. And typically, the laws and policies will fall way behind what the technology is actually doing. So it's not clear to me that any of those current policies are appropriate or effective, even in what we're trying to accomplish.
Rick, you know, we see growing anger for both Chinese and the Europeans about the long-arm jurisdiction following the cancellation of the Iran nuclear deal. And you can raise the case of ZTE and Huawei to follow up what's going on there. Now, do you understand the grievances of the Europeans and the Chinese?
Yes, because the whole issue of long-arm jurisdiction requires good faith on the part of the American government. You have to trust that the Justice Department of the United States, the State Department, the Defense Department are acting in good faith based on facts, not on politics. And I think European allies have been bullied by Donald Trump so much in his 2.5 years that right now they don't have faith in his word if one of his departments or if he, via Twitter, says something. So I can see that, and China for more than a year has been involved in trade dispute with the United States, and some of these issues the Chinese government absolutely denies, and so yes, I see why there is a lack of faith, and why if the United States tries to get other nations to send people to the U.S. to face criminal charges, there would be some resistance.
Well, there's no question that China does respect the importance of a court of appeal at the WTO for settling most of the trade disputes. However, in the case of international ruling, of international arbitration on the South China Sea, China didn't give serious attention, of course, on the maritime disputes there. But what about this case of a long-arm jurisdiction? Do you think China would, of course, show more defiance because this allegedly interferes with our internal affairs?
It's probably not less about the defiance. It's more about, eventually, it's more about how the different countries respect each other's jurisdiction. The long-arm jurisdiction of the United States law is very complex body of law, and it's controversial. Okay, even inside the U.S., sometimes the court and the U.S. DOJ, Department of Justice, don't agree with each other. You know, in what situation the long-arm jurisdiction should be imposed. It's really about in what circumstances that the U.S. government can prosecute a case against the acts that happened outside the U.S. To give them credit, you know, the U.S. prosecutor indeed successfully prosecuted some very corrupted officials that have done the stuff even outside the U.S. But it's getting more and more you know, complicated, especially in today's environments when the geopolitics, you know, that looks like geopolitics really played a big role in those decision of prosecution. Now, of course, you know, China or the European countries will find more resistance to the kind of a case that the U.S. district attorneys are fighting.
Let me go back to Ernest McDuffie. For the issue of 5G technology, you're an expert of cybersecurity. On the 6th of June, China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology began issuing 5G licenses for commercial use, marking China's official entry into the 5G era. That's a major step for the 5th generation of a wireless telecommunication, by the way, Ernest. So what does this mean for the Chinese economy and the potential social transformation as 5G technology comes into commercial use? Ernest?
Yeah, so I think it's a big step in the right direction, right? 5G technology is going to be a major game changer globally, in terms of access, speed, the capabilities of the network. So this first issuing of licenses to put out platforms that allow operations in the millimeter wavelength frame and then 20 to 60 gigahertz operation is going to increase bandwidth and capabilities across the globe. So again, this idea of what kind of software applications ride on top of that new platform is going to be much more critical than the fact that the platform exists at all. These platforms will exist. I think the technology's out of the bottle, and there's so much benefit to it that it will move forward regardless of what company is in the lead, whether you're in the lead by 6 months or a year and a half. Other companies will get there. And then the type of applications that a Microsoft or a Google or Facebook will put on top of those platforms will really be where a lot of your security risks are going to come from, on that application level as well. So there's security risks across the board, from the hardware level of what's supporting the 5G technology all the way through the application level of what's going to ride on top of that. So it's going to be a huge challenge for the global community to mitigate against these new potential security vulnerabilities.
Ernest, let me ask one more question. The race to 5G is one of the hottest technological battles vying for the primacy of digital leadership. There's no question about that. But here are two issues. One is the costs, whether those countries with big market shares for 4G stand ready to facilitate the rise of 5G, because that means a lot for those who invested heavily in the latest generation of 4G, to say nothing of 5G. Second, what do you think of the commercial market reconfiguration between Huawei, Nokia, Ericsson, and Samsung of South Korea? First of all, the reconfiguration issue.
Yeah, so I just read an article saying, I think it was Nokia that says that they have a technology solution that builds on top of 4G, as opposed to requiring 4G to be ripped out and 5G to come in and totally replace it, which obviously would be a lot more costly. So, it's one of these things, technology moves so quickly and the advances happen so rapidly, it's hard to make a judgment a priori as to who's going to come out on top. Currently Huawei has certainly a dominant global share of the telecommunications equipment market, but these other companies are doing innovative things as well, and so you really can't tell where it's all going to wash out in the end. I think the competition is healthy as long as it goes in a transparent and open process. I think the consumers will have a lot to say on who wins that competition.
Wisely said. Thank you very much, Ernest, for allegations on fair competitions. The issue is whether we're going to have fair competitions, whether politics would step in. Rick, what are your thoughts about, for example, the guts and ability of European leaders to say no to President Trump about restricting Huawei's access to the European market?
I think at this point, many of them will have the guts to say no, but not all of them. I think the danger that's coming is if the United States says you're either with us or against us, and ties 5G to other issues like government aid, defense cooperation, then that would put these countries in a very difficult position. But I think right now, Donald Trump has been so over the top on so many issues that I think a lot of American allies are ready to ignore him unless it's absolutely in their interest to be with him.
Just given the legally binding force of 5G alliance, it's difficult for European leaders to say no to the U.S. order, despite the anger of Germans in particular.
Right.
If you follow the latest development. Now, He Jing, even if the United States were to restrict the use of Chinese equipment suppliers domestically, the United States is not big enough in terms of its market in wireless to prevent China's 5G suppliers from continuing to increase market shares elsewhere around the world.
Right.
So U.S. vendors will in turn be unable to invest R&D towards future 5G offerings due to decreasing market share. What do you make of this?
I think this really the ecosystem, right? It's really about, right now we talk about the Americans, Chinese, but if you really talk about the 5G, it's really global. It sounds interesting to talk about the race, right, from different countries, but it really demands a global collaboration of all the players work together. It's really the beginning of something. The 5G, whatever we're talking about, the launch of the 5G, the network, is really beginning of something. Like what Ernest has said, it really requires all the players to give it their best to develop all the right applications that work on the 5G, the network. If there's no really right the applications, for example, if we don't have the right applications for driverless cars to work, to really using the low latency, the feature of 5G, and the network is not that useful. So I think all this the rhetoric is not really that useful. It's really this is the time it demands all the global technology companies work much closer. So that's why it's really unfortunate that all this the disputes, all the geopolitics makes probably will slow down the technology, the progress.
Not surprised that Mr. He Jing put his finger on the issue of ecosystem for the growth of the 5G technology. Do you think Americans, European partners, and our neighboring economies such as India, Japan, and ASEAN countries would cooperate with Huawei to build the ecosystem? And perhaps China is ready to give up North America, given the poisonous pill.
I think one of the things you have to think of here is 5G coming from nothing versus 5G coming from 4G. I think China and Huawei have a major advantage on countries that are coming from basically nowhere to the future. So that would be largely Africa. You may have a situation with India, other countries where you don't have a really big 4G infrastructure. I think the European companies are more likely to, as Gerald said, have an advantage where you could have a fix to move 4G to 5G. I know this is getting complicated in the business, but the overlay is that the countries that China is working with Belt and Road, with AIIB, are the countries that would need the 5G from nowhere. And so it really fits in with China's economic strategy and its strategy of opening up to a lot of Africa, Asia, and even without the market of America, the Americas, and without some of Europe, this is still a huge market.
The last issue before we conclude this interesting discussion about 5G, He Jing, is costs. It seems the average price for each of the 5G smartphone would be put at between 5,000 to 8,000 yuan. That's a lot for the purchasing power of the middle class. So the results of the latest survey show that up to 34% are very reluctant, if not totally, unwilling to buy the fifth generation of smartphones. Right. Also, plus rising costs of R&D for the operators. What do you think of the immediate prospect for the consumers? Size does matter, however, costs matter more for the consumers.
That's why I think I think it's probably generally known now that the 5G is not really that a big must for this the regular kind of a smartphone, the conversations. I mean the telecom applications is really more for all kinds of other applications for the driverless cars or medical device, everything. So everything like for the kind of mobile communication we're doing every day is probably more than sufficient for. I mean 4G network is more than sufficient. So I just that's why I think all the 5G launch. I'm hoping that.
Thank you so much. It's going to be a process to develop the fifth generation of wireless telecommunications. Huawei, of course, assumes leadership, but we cannot sit back complacently. There are so many who want to catch up, and this is a very tough battle. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.